Hey everybody, happy 2021. Whenever I start looking into the culture of an area and taking a deep dive into a destination, I always start with its history. Just because it's fun to take pieces of different areas of their culture and seeing where they came from, it really helps kind of tie everything together. So without further ado, let's take a little dip and go into the history of New Orleans. New Orleans is an American city with French, Spanish, and Creole roots. It has many stories and a heck of a lot of history. But remember, we're a community here, or soon to be one. If there's anything that I'm leaving out that you find important, if you've been there before, or are just a history buff and know a lot about New Orleans or any of the places we cover, please let us know. We're only gonna get better together. Let's start this story back in the 1690s. France made their way to what we know now as Louisiana. At the time, the Choctaw Native American Tribe occupied the region. Just a little side note real quick, Mardi Gras started in 1699. That was the first year the celebration was held. And it was there to commemorate France occupying and acquiring this piece of land. So thank you, France, for that celebration and all of the colorful beads that everybody loves, except for maybe sea creatures. Recyclable beads 2021. Fingers crossed. Fast forward a little bit to 1718. France wanted to develop and construct a new city in their new Western territory, and they decided to put it along the Mississippi River for easier access for trade. The Choctaw Native American Tribe showed the French the ways of the land, the ways the river flowed, the ins and outs of the territory. The French started making strides in construction and infrastructure in 1721 and used a lot of the local lumber to build their buildings. At this time in construction is actually when Bourbon Street was made, and it wasn't named after the corn alcoholic beverage here in America. It was actually named after the Royal House of Bourbon, who at the time was occupying the throne in France. Fast forward a little bit more, and Spain actually acquired New Orleans from France in 1763. Later that century, there were two devastating fires that burned down a lot of those original French buildings. The Spanish put on their thinking caps and said, let's not use wood, let's use brick and hope that these fires don't happen again. One more side note real quick. When walking through the French Quarter, you'll actually notice a lot more Spanish architecture than French, despite the name, because the Spanish had to rebuild a lot of what the French already did. In the year 1800, France actually reacquired New Orleans from the Spanish. However, only 3 years later, it was sold to America in the Louisiana Purchase. At this point in time, there were still many French, Spanish, and Haitians living in New Orleans. While France had New Orleans, they also occupied Haiti. So many French slave owners that lived on the Haitian islands moved to New Orleans and brought their slaves with them. And a lot of Haitians also moved to New Orleans on their own during the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804. So we're in that confusing time period where Spain owned it, then France, and then America, a lot of Haitians coming in. The French, Spanish, Haitian trifecta didn't think very highly of the Americans that were coming into their home. And likewise, the Americans didn't really think highly of them either. The original locals, meaning the French, Spanish, and Haitians, tried to keep Americans off of their French Quarter, the historic area, and built Canal Street as a place for them to hang out and do their thing. Apparently when you're walking through the streets, you can actually see the street signs change from French to English. So the Haitian people living there were given a higher regard than the Americans. And they were also given the opportunity to buy their own freedom so they wouldn't be given over to the hands of American slave drivers. This resulted in many free people of color in New Orleans. Congo Square is a place within the city where Haitians were able to congregate, they were able to dance, listen to their Creole music, but they were also allowed to sell handmade crafts, food items, in order to save up to buy their own freedom. After the War of 1812, the city's population nearly doubled. There was an influx of French, Irish, and German immigrants, and New Orleans quickly became the wealthiest city in America. Now in 1836, local government divided the city up into 3 different municipalities: the French Quarter, Tremé, and downtown. Fast forward a little bit, the 1920s are considered a sad time for New Orleans architecture, as the city decided that they wanted to modernize the look of everything and got rid of a lot of that old world charm. But thankfully, there's still a lot of it preserved today. So that was a quick and brief dive into the history of New Orleans. Hopefully it was right to the point with a lot of useful information. Hopefully you can walk down the streets, the French Quarter, and notice a lot of these little things here and there. We'll see you on the next one. I encourage you to type in your experiences, whether good or bad, enjoyable or scary, in New Orleans in the comments below. let's get this rolling. I'd love to hear what everybody has to say. Let me know what you thought about this, if you like these little dives into history. Next, we'll probably go into regions or food, just because those are two very important things also. Travel well. So thank you, France, or so thank you, France, for all the beads. Yes.